Within the story for the prologue of Dead Space 3, the scaf forces under the command of General Mahad were in a losing battle with the forces of the recombinant nightmare that are the necromorphs, ripping and tearing their forces to pieces only to raise them to their side. Dr. Serrano would find out what the machine was used for and who the target for such a device was used against. The entity that everyone had perceived to be a destroyed moon was in fact a necromorph itself. The final evolution for these creatures, it would seem. Once the information had made its way back to Mahad, he would inform the situation to the Sovereign Colony Council, and upon reviewing the situation, the information, and the losses involved, they would issue an order to invoke Scenario 5. Scenario 5 was to be the order to purge the entire operation. The forces, the research, the records, the crew members on board the ships stationing over Tau Volantis, and making sure that no one could go to the planet or escape their fate. Scenario 5 was to be only used in the state an extinction level situation was happening, or close to be happening. With their forces shrinking, the necromorphs were close to adding them to their own twisted collection. If Serrano was to get his calculations wrong, it could be the end for everyone. It was not a risk humanity could take in the eyes of the Council. Ammunitions and armaments would be confiscated and vehicles destroyed in preparation for the scenario, so that the resistance would not be able to carry much weight. Tim and Sam would eventually link up under Dr. Serrano's direction to find the Codex within the Purge. Most of the forces had already been dealt with, and Mahad would be cleaning up some of the soldiers down in the silo compound. Tim and Sam would find the mule and battle the crew, or what was left of them. They would eventually get to the cockpit, where the Codex was sitting on the dashboard. As Tim picked it up, the ship would begin to tremor, and the two would rappel out the side of the ship and slide across the bottom of the cliff face when the ship would give chase. Tim would escape the debris, however Sam would not be so lucky. Mahad would catch Tim and shoot him point blank in the face, resulting in his death. Now, normally this is where the story concluded for the prologue, with Mahad shooting himself after purging the information stored on the Codex. However, we are going to change the story's outcome with this segment, and say that Tim would see Mahad reaching for his pistol, and then attack him, struggling against him until they both hear this climactic shot that most films and series use to fool the viewer. Within this scenario, let's say that Mahad is shot and dies instead of Tim. This is where Tim would take his weapon and the Codex down into the depths of the silo and get into contact with Serrano as he begins his journey into the alien city. Tim, upon entering the outskirts of the city, would stare out towards the spire, located at the center of the city, in awe. He would journey forth into the caverns and catacombs of the alien city. As he does, Serrano would be tracking his movements, and would get into contact with him. Tim would ask if he should bring the Codex to Serrano. However, Serrano would instruct him to take it to the conduits that were used to program the configuration of the machine. Tim would use the Codex to configure the first conduit, much like how Isaac would in the future, and proceed to the following conduit. As he does, Tim would start feeling the effects of the several markers scattered around the city. He would start feeling guilty, as the price for surviving his encounter with Mahad meant he had to live with the memory of killing his general, the man he had followed to this frozen battleground, this icy hellscape. Tim, upon getting to the other side of the inner sanctum, heard something, a noise whispering into his ear. Upon hearing of this, he would spin around to see just a cold, damp corridor of rock and the dimly lit environment he had walked into. After a few moments staring down the path he came from, hearing nothing but his heavy breathing, Tim would stand down and turn back to his current journey. Tim would come to a research station. However, what he sees truly shocks him. Body parts scattered all over the place, bodies piled up, the ground stained by their combined blood. Knowing what the cause was, Tim would try not to linger and move on quickly when he would fall over. As soon as he hit the floor, Tim frantically looked around for what had tripped him, when he would see an arm laying on the floor near to a soldier's dead body. Catching his breath, he would notice a tool that could help him in the task ahead of him. He would see a kinesis module attached to a strap on the arm. Tim would unlatch the module and attach it to his arm. Tim would pick up the arm laying on the floor and put it on the lap of the dead soldier and tell him that he is sorry before moving on to the upper platform. He would get to the top of the platform after riding the elevator and come to an obstacle. The kinesis module was too weak for what he needed to do. He would contact Serrano, where he would tell him of the green lit discs on the floor. Using these, Tim began to spin the pylons to where they needed to be until he heard scratching noises that slowly turned into something regurgitating. The slain scientists had been recombinated and seeked to add Tim's flesh to their side. Using his weapon, he would spray while screaming at these horrific sights until hearing the fateful sounds of his weapon clicking, prompting him to stop aiming and reload frantically until one of the necromorphs had gone for him, making him lose his balance and his weapon as it fell into the chasm below. Holding out his hand towards the necromorph, feeling weak from the disc's influence over his body, he quickly thought, if the kinesis could now tug on these huge pylons and get them to move, then perhaps he could rip the limbs off these creatures of the darkness. Putting his theory into practice, he would see that he now found a new form of weaponry. Tim would use this new power to defeat the oncoming waves of necromorphs and continue on with his mission, only wishing he could bring the disc with him, as now he was defenseless without it. As Tim was configuring the machine, he would begin hearing the whispering again, but this time he would see an apparition of General Mahad. The general would tell him that Serrano would betray him, that the good doctor intends on unleashing the Titan laying in dormancy above them. Tim would walk away from these ridiculous attempts at getting him to betray Serrano. However, on his way back to the first conduit, the marker's influence would begin to unhinge his mind even further, to the point where he would begin to doubt his mission. He didn't understand what he would be doing, and would contact Serrano asking him to help him understand the gravity of the mission. Serrano would tell him of some parts of what he knows, but would tell him not to dawdle and get a move on. The apparition would return to Tim, making him doubt his mission even further. Tim would finish the task, and Serrano would inform him that he has done it, and tell him to return to the base of the spire, where Serrano would wait for him. The marker's influence would continue tugging on Tim, bringing him closer and closer to becoming deranged towards Serrano's end goal. However, he would reunite with Serrano. Serrano would notice a change within Tim and ask if everything was okay, but Tim would say that he was fine in a low, monotoned voice. Regardless, Serrano knew that they needed to finish their job to save everything the markers had in sight for their twisted conquest. The two would climb up the interior of the spire, and as they reached the top and saw the final conduit, Serrano would take the codex from Tim and move towards the controls of the machine. Mahad would appear again, telling Tim that he needs to act now, otherwise the consequences could be dire, with them losing everything they had worked so hard for. Tim would make a desperate decision and rip the codex from Serrano with his kinesis module. Serrano would ask Tim what he was doing, with Tim answering, saving the universe from his intentions. Serrano would attempt to negotiate with Tim, however he would not relent, and instead stood his ground. Serrano would tell him that he needs to do this, and that they can go home after this event. Tim still stood against him, becoming more and more deranged. Serrano continued talking as he walked closer and closer to Tim, which would lead into a physical confrontation between the two. They would fight each other for a little while, until Tim had pushed Serrano and he would trip and fall into the orifice that they had climbed out of, with Serrano screaming. His screams would fade as he fell, but would stop with the sound of a loud thud that echoed through the city. This noise would attract nearby necromorphs traveling through the corrupted halls of the alien civilization. Mahad would tell Tim to forget the doctor and to make them whole, to finish what they had started. Tim would place the codex into the conduit and twisted it until seeing the outcome that he tried to prevent, with Mahad smiling at him. Tim would start acting in denial, asking himself, what did he do? With Mahad stating, "You have done well, Tim. Now Convergence can continue, and your reward is coming for all of you, for all of your species." The ceiling of the city would begin to crumble, revealing Serrano's and the former general's fear that the Brethren moon orbiting the planet had awakened and would consume this world and continue its infestation towards new worlds, like Earth. Now that could have happened, but what if Tim did not become deranged and attack Serrano? Well, let's take out that part, shall we? And perhaps he was able to resist the marker's pull on him. What if this led them to succeed in their mission? What could the ramifications be on that event for the future? Let's explore that possibility. The marker's influence would continue bringing Tim closer and closer to becoming deranged towards Serrano's end goal. However, when he would reunite with Serrano, the good doctor would notice something was off and ask if everything was okay, but Tim would state that he was fine in a low, monotone voice. Regardless, Serrano knew that they needed to finish their job to save everything the markers had in sight for their twisted conquest. The two would climb up the interior of the spire, and as they reached the top and the final conduit was in sight, Serrano would take the codex and move towards the controls of the machine. With a twist of the controls, a blast could be heard coming from above them, shattering the ceiling of the city. The machine began powering up before a stream of mint light propelling towards the moon itself had emerged from the firing mechanism. After surviving the rocks falling towards them, they would hear a huge noise like the mother of all atom bombs had just ignited and exploded, followed by another noise that sounded like a titan groaning in pain. Looking above them, they can see an entity falling towards them that looked to be like frozen rocks falling from orbit. However, those weren't rocks. They were in fact frozen chunks of flesh falling from the explosion. Serrano would exclaim that they needed to move to escape the moon from falling to their location. The two would rappel down the spire and move through the city. The two would have approximately 5 minutes before the moon's remains would crush the city and impact the planet. Fighting through the hordes of necromorphs that was still there, both Tim and Serrano would escape back to the silo and move back up to the surface on board the conveyor Tim had brought down there, until feeling a huge tremor that had shuddered the surrounding terrain of rock and ice. The silo tunnel would begin to crack and fall onto the platform, forcing it back down into the alien city. Serrano and Tim would somehow survive the fall. However, Tim would ask, how are there still necromorphs even after the moon was destroyed? But Serrano would tell him the unfortunate truth that there were in fact more moons out there, and they only destroyed one of them. The two would continue arguing until hearing a noise coming towards them. The noises sounded like a wet footstep coming in their direction, followed by more and more, until seeing something dark moving through the mist, and there Tim sees it, red, burning eyes, staring back at him through the mist. As it stepped out of the fog, it would roar at them, announcing its presence to the pair, which was followed by more and more coming to their location. The remaining necromorphs in this den had found them and were drawing closer and closer to them, as if they knew Tim and Serrano were defenseless and were waiting for their time to come. All that could be heard as the fog enveloped them was silence, as if the mist itself had swallowed them whole. The consequences of this event would not be known until the 24th century, where new marker outbreaks would occur, as the reason that the markers could not finalize Convergence was due to Convergence being on pause at Tau Volantis, which had somehow affected all markers' capabilities that had existed at the time or were yet to be brought into existence. Perhaps the outbreak on Aegis 7 could bring Convergence, or perhaps the Sprawl, but who knows? All we know is that Convergence was paused. Even if defeated by Tim and Serrano, the event had released all markers from this endgame stasis. I think that if Tim and Serrano were to be successful in their overall plight, death would still come for them in the end. However, a reason I think Scenario 5 was exactly what needed to be done at that point in time was because, regardless of the outcome, other markers in the universe would be able to commit to Convergence completely, which means more moons would become whole and wreak havoc across the stars. But I feel Tim's and Serrano's ending in this scenario fits the theme of Dead Space, or should I say, Dead Silence. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, then please give the video a like rating and let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section, and I look forward to hearing from you. Sign up to join the British Alliance today by subscribing and ringing in the notification bell for updates on future videos, streams and posts, and I will see all of you awesome people on the front lines, and have a good one.